This is called the lightning talks because they're super quick and we're going to be really strict with the time so that we do get everybody out of here before sundown. So thanks to everybody. I'm Dr. Keisha Burke from the HRV Primary Care Clinical Trials Network, and we're delighted to open this session for the first time in this conference, where we'll have 5 presenters who will outline their involvement approaches, and they'll get some friendly feedback from our panel, who is Derek Stewart, who you heard of earlier from Nottingham University Hospitals Trust, and a friend of ourselves here in Galway, and Professor Carolyn Jenkins. You'll hear her speak the keynote after the workshops. She's a research professor at the Medical University of South Carolina and has been working with communities to improve health outcomes related to diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And Denis Mockler. Denis is from our Galway Primary Care PPI group within the network, and he's an active member of this group since its inception in 2016. And Denis has actually presented and sang at this conference in previous years, so we're delighted to have him here on the panel. And he's a singer-songwriter and poet, well known around Galway. So I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves. We have the slides here up on this, and they're all in one row. So we're going to have Rachel Bermingham up here first. Rachel. Right.
Hi everybody. So thank you first for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's not often that we get out of the office and talk about our PPI activities, I suppose, because they're quite new, but I suppose it's great that there's events like this that we can speak at. So I'm going to speak today about embedding patient reviewers in the grant review process. So I work at the Irish Cancer Society. I'm a research officer there in the research department. So the Irish Cancer Society is the largest voluntary funder of cancer research in Ireland. So this is money donated from members of the public, and it's put towards funding cancer research in Ireland. So each year we have about 3 million in funding available for cancer researchers that are based in Ireland. So the Irish Cancer Society, the patients are at the core of everything that we do. We strive to put patients at the very heart of everything that we do. And in the research department, we have been doing this in that we're funding cancer research with the ultimate aim of improving the lives of cancer patients. But actually in our processes within funding those applications, it hasn't been as much of patient involvement. So that's what we were trying to change. And just to give you an idea of what our processes were like historically, so we announced a funding call. I'm not sure if there's researchers here in the room, but it's announced through the colleges online. So people know about it, applications are submitted, and then what happens is the scientific review panel will review these applications. And this can be like a 2-stage process, and it might involve an interview. For each call it can be different, but there are always scientists that were reviewing the applications. And then an award was made based on those reviews. But I suppose something that we noticed was missing was the patients. So where were the patient reviewers in this process? And up until 2017, they weren't really anywhere. So it was 2017 that we started to think about it, and we had a patient reviewer review the lay summary of some of our applications, and it went very well, but we found that the patient reviewer didn't really have as equal an input into the decision as the scientific review panel did. So in a way, we felt it was somewhat tokenistic, but it was a good start and it got us going. So this leads me to what I'm going to present on today. So we had a call out last year, and I won't get into the specifics of it, but it was for a project grant. It was around 30,000, and the aim of the call was to develop existing research that, someone was doing a project and they're at a point where the funding had stopped and they needed this extra money to keep it going, to try and get it to a more competitive level, to get more funding, or to make it more impactful. So we decided to pilot including a patient panel as part of this review process. So these are the steps that we did. So we still had a scientific review panel. So the applications came in, we checked they're eligible, and they went to the scientific review panel, and they actually looked at all aspects of the application. So there was the CVs, the project summary. This would be where all the science parts, the methods, objectives, and everything would be in there. Sustainability plan, career development plan, and then a lay research pitch. And I'll talk about this in a few seconds. But they saw everything of the application. And it was from here that they reviewed them and they shortlisted the applications that they felt were fundable. So they were deemed scientifically sound, and the scientific panel were happy to fund any of them. So going forward, these applications were sent to the patient review panel. So this is a panel of 3. And we had 2 separate awards, so there was 3 on each panel, but I'll just speak about one of them. So the panel, but before we sent the applications to the panel, they had a half day of training, and that was held in the Cancer Society, and the training kind of went through background of the society, background of PPI, and then it got into the specifics of the call, and importantly it covered the lay research pitch, because this is what the patients were going to be reviewing. So they didn't see any other aspects, only the lay research pitch. And at application stage, we'd asked the applicants to, they were aware that the lay research pitch was actually the thing that they were going to be, whoever ended up getting it was going to be based on the lay research pitch. So it was very important. And they were given guidelines, there was a webinar, and they were told to write in a lay manner that it was understandable. And they had to address these 4 questions. So what problem did their project address? Where did it fit into the broader environment, and the potential impact that it had on patients, and the plan to share their findings? So in the half-day training, we went through this and gave good and bad examples, and we tried to help the panel as much as we could. The applications were then sent, and they individually reviewed them. They came back to the society, and we had they had a panel discussion, and at the end of it, an award was made. So in our point of view, did the process work? From our perspective, it did, because what we set out to do was fund an application, and that's what happened. But importantly, what was the patient experience in it? So this is, we sent out a feedback survey after the process had finished, and this was the feedback that we got. So it was very positive. The blue is very positive, the orange is positive. So they really enjoyed it, and we knew from the discussion meeting that it had gone well, and they had lots and lots of feedback. So this is just some of the quotes. It was a privilege and a responsibility to be involved. I learned a great deal, and it's good to get a sense of the research ongoing. Given the patient reviewers had the final say, I was anxious at first and felt a responsibility to do it thoroughly, and spent a lot longer than I thought on it, on the review. So just some observations from both sides. The question how they asked is really important. So we had 4 separate questions. The researchers, I suppose, looking back, we should have made it that they had to answer in 4 separate boxes, because some of the researchers just threw it all in, and it made it very difficult for the patients to compare, because some of them were just all over the place. Also, impact is actually quite hard to define, so it was hard to try and get patients to think about impact, and when we had trouble ourselves trying to define it. So this is just, you can see that this is just showing that they had some difficulty in reviewing the lay research pitch. And then training is very important. They loved the training and they found it extremely useful. This was in-person training, and they felt that that's the way it should continue. And importantly, the time commitment, it was a huge amount of time. We didn't know, because it was the first time we'd done this, how long it was going to be. But it ended up, I think it took them a lot longer than I thought. But now we know that, we can try and find ways to make it a bit shorter so it's not taking up as much of their time. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to start the timer so that we do finish up. So does anyone have, Carolyn, would you like to comment on, I think, the leadership in the Irish Cancer Society and making sure that the patients have the final decision on this?
Okay, well, I certainly applaud you for your efforts, and I have a couple of questions that are food for thought.
Okay.
One is, was there any training in PPI for your scientific review panel, because that's usually an issue when we're dealing with PPI or community engaged research with expert reviewers. So that's one question. And the second is, did the researchers participate or listen for the final patient discussion, or was there any thought for involving them so as to educate them in the process of PPI?
So yeah, your first question, I suppose the scientific review panel saw the lay research pitch, and what I didn't say in the presentation was that the comments, we'd asked them to give comments that would then be fed into the patient review panel. So we felt that, the patient review panel, we wanted to see what the scientific compared to, but what we actually found happened was that the scientific review panel didn't really give comments. I gave very random comments that didn't really help the patients, and we had seen this. So before we went into the training, we decided to let the patients know that they didn't necessarily have to look at the scientific comments, but we had told them they were going to receive them, so we had to give them. But we felt that some of them were actually quite biased. They were trying to maybe let the patients know that they really liked this application, and the person was a really good researcher. I know it wasn't intentional, but that's how it came across, so it could bias opinion. So thankfully the patient reviewers didn't look at them until after they had done their own reviews. So training, I think is actually really important. We didn't give them any training, but I think that showed actually.
A good manuscript for lessons learned.
Yeah. And then the second question, I suppose no one was there at the discussion meeting. The researchers weren't there to hear feedback on their applications, but we did give them the patient feedback after a decision was made. So there is some feedback given to them, so that hopefully that they can take it on board.
I think it was very good that the PPI were making the decision at the end, and I think it was also very good that there was training given to the PPI reviewers. That they, how did that go? Was that difficult to do? The training, and that was. Did you come up with the idea, or did you think it was a good idea?
So I suppose it was my manager Claire Kilty designed most of it out with my input, and also Deirdre Murphy's volunteer support coordinator. So we'd attended a lot of events like this, there was training in UCD, just kind of bits that we took from different places, but we didn't have anything to start with ourselves. But there's such good things out there that we took them. And I know it took a lot of time. We're finding that PPI, takes a lot of resources. We thought it was worth it. The day itself, I feel, went really well, and the feedback says that as well. But it was really important because they had a lot of questions, and some people don't know what PPI is. They kind of just came because they're interested, but it seemed to go really well from both sides.
Okay. Thanks very much. So my name is Sinead Hynes, and I'm from the School of Health Sciences here in NUI Galway. And I'm going to be talking about a trial that we're setting up at the moment. So this is kind of very timely because we're in the process of writing up our ethics application and recruiting staff members and things like that. So any feedback is really appreciated at this point. So just some context. So this is a HRB funded trial that's due to start in July of this year and run for 30 months. So it's a trial of cognitive rehabilitation for people living with multiple sclerosis that experience cognitive difficulties. So things like problems with memory, concentration, attention, and things like that are impacting on their daily lives. So we're testing a program called the Cognitive Occupation-Based Program for People with Multiple Sclerosis, or the COB-MS. And the aim of this program is to reduce these symptoms and to improve people's everyday lives. So the main aim is, as it's a feasibility trial, is to test the integrity of the protocol, to test some of the clinical outcomes and also the feasibility of the trial in general. So in terms of the PPI approaches that we have embedded into this trial, I suppose the first and probably the most significant, I think, for our trial is that we're recruiting a patient representative onto the research team. So this patient representative will be employed on the trial as it's the equivalent of 1 day a week for the duration of the trial. And the idea is that this person will be responsible with support for the PPI activities that are on the trial, and really to give a voice to the patient on all the activities that are ongoing within the trial, from the design to the recruitment documents and various other aspects. So there'll be opportunities for this person to get involved in research papers, contribute to research papers, conferences, and any other aspects that they are interested in getting involved in. There'll also be a PPI member on the trial steering committee. And we hope also to set up, with the help of MS Ireland, a PPI consultation group. And this group will be involved in aspects such as reviewing recruitment documents, so things like the information sheets, consent forms for patients, as well as other things like Facebook posts or newsletter items, things like that. We're going to be interviewing people who participate in the intervention and also people who decline to participate in the intervention. And we hope that the PPI members will be able to help to define some of those questions that will be asked of these two groups of people. They'll be advising on the study requirements, so things in the protocol, and particularly the kind of the burden that will be placed on patients maybe who are participating in the trial, whether they think the requirements of the trial, the intervention, as well as some of the kind of homework activities are acceptable for patients. And also, if possible, they might be able to get involved in aspects of analysis with support, particularly in some of the aspects that they might have given advice on, such as the interviews for people who participated in the intervention. There's also opportunities for dissemination of the findings of the trial and events and experiences and things like that through vlogs, newspaper articles, newsletters. So we're going to have a kind of a regular newsletter on updates on the trial and things like that, and also international and national conferences. Sorry, there's also some planned knowledge translation events. So there's going to be 5 events that will take place at the end of the trial, where we'll be talking about the results of the trial. And the PPI research assistant will help in kind of finding out kind of what the best locations, the best timings for these events. But the idea is that we'll be talking about the results of the trial and talking about the potential impact and also planning for the future through those events. So in terms of then some of the challenges and they kind of anticipate, so timing would be the first thing. So there's certain things that have to happen at certain times in the process. As I mentioned, we're in the process of writing up the ethics application for this, but we're still kind of bound to certain things that are promised through the grant application. We can make some amendments, but we have to keep to some of the to all of the promises that we made in the grant application. That said, this is a feasibility trial, so any kind of changes that we can't make at this stage, we may be able to make in the future in a future trial. In terms of training, so as I mentioned, there's a patient representative that will be on the trial, but there's no budget for training for that person. So all of the training will have to be within the team or using kind of free resources. One way of going around that is to hire an experienced PPI member. We're quite reluctant to do that because it's narrowing the pool of people that we will be able to recruit from, and also excludes people that might have a lot of relevant experience. And also training for the research team on working with PPI members and evaluation of PPI events. Funding is another area, so we have funding for some aspects of the PPI activities, but not all. So some of our consultation events, for example, with the PPI group may need to be done online if this is possible using online platforms like Zoom or Skype or something like that. And then finally, evaluation is another area that may be a challenge. So it's something that's new to us as a research team. We don't have experience in terms of evaluating the impact of our PPI activities. So this is something that's going to need a bit of work, and methods need to be developed in order to support this. So just to finish on a quote, if we're serious about involvement, then we need to be equally serious about evaluation. So thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. I'll just hand it over to our panel now. Maybe Derek, would you like to speak?
Thanks to both speakers so far. I didn't come in the last one, but thank you. Really interesting, lovely plans. If Ignatius Maguire, lovely colleague up in Belfast, if he was here, he would say, "What have you done so far?" So what you need to do is in this feasibility study, set up more of an inquiry. Does this work? Will this work? Because I would think that putting one person onto your committee puts a lot of pressure on that individual. So I would normally suggest 2 people. So if one of us can't be there, the other person could come in, right? So just think about this stage, just testing out ideas. So when you go for a full grant, at a later stage, you can say, here's what we've done already, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful, and something particularly, I suppose, with the condition that we're talking about when there's issues around fatigue and, people have to take time for treatments and things like that. That's a really relevant point. Thank you.
Certainly, I applaud you for including the payment for the 20% FTE. That is rarely done and something that we need to address. Then a question that I had is, if you think about your FTE, and if one of the major roles is to advise your group, but also to help you plan a half-day knowledge translation event, then your FTE probably needs to be someone who is well respected in the community as well as able to recruit and bring people to the event, because that's a problem that we experience oftentimes in the US without adequate recruitment.
Okay, thanks very much for that. That's really useful advice. The position has actually just gone up on the Galway vacancies website today, so yeah, it's really useful in terms of the recruitment process, so thank you.
Comment that it's often very tempted for us as researchers to hire someone who acts like us or has knowledge like us, but that diverse person may be someone to think about.
Yeah, certainly very interesting. A lot to learn there from the international perspectives on, as we're kind of treading this new path of embedding our PPI people in our trials and projects. So our next international speaker, so thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Jytte Isaksen from University of Southern Denmark. I'm a speech and language therapist by background, and I'll tell you about a study that I'm currently involved in. And thank you for the opportunity to present here today. And I would also like to acknowledge my co-authors and funders of this project. Aphasia is a language disorder causing communication problems following stroke and other acquired brain disorders. Aphasia means that gaining communicative accessibility in healthcare will be challenging, since the nature of aphasia makes conversation between staff and patient hard. Insufficient clinical communication affects the outcomes of rehabilitation negatively. This project started with a nurse at an acute ward suggesting the stroke team should be taught conversation partner training or to support conversation. However, since the evidence for health professionals using supported conversation in acute and rehab settings is not that great, we ended up with this aim of creating a more connected and cohesive rehabilitation journey for people with aphasia through better communication with staff. That could potentially include conversation partner training depending on what we, together with our co-designers, in this case, people with aphasia, family members and healthcare professionals, would suggest and design. I won't tell you a lot about the first phase of the project, but basically we searched the literature for inspiration to build upon. We made observations of communication between staff and people with aphasia in hospitals and other health settings, and we interviewed some of those people about their experiences, needs, and opinions of communication support and accessibility. Based on what we learned in this phase, artifacts for the design process were made. Some examples are personas. That's a kind of standard persons reflecting who a person with aphasia, a family member, or a health professional could be. And we also created so-called opportunity rooms that are small summaries based on observations and interviews in where we could see opportunities for further development related to our aim. Together with our co-designers, we started phase 2 by brainstorming into those rooms of opportunities with the personas in mind. After pitching ideas, we voted to narrow down to fewer ideas. Later, the ideas had to either be translated into prototypes or storyboards. All this happened in a rather iterative process, alternating between design workshops with health professionals and workshops with people living with aphasia. At the moment, we are still somewhere in that second phase. PPI have taken place at different stages of the project, but not all stakeholder groups have been involved in each phase. For example, only healthcare professionals were used in the identifying and prioritizing phase, whereas 3 stakeholder groups were involved, and that was health professionals, people with aphasia, and significant others in the design phase. Through a series of co-design workshops using qualitative methods inspired by principles from participatory design thinking and nominal group technique. We ended up with 7 ideas with our co-designers, but due to time and financial restrictions, only some of them got to be further developed. And they're the ones here at the top of the slide. As I've written here, the selection process could have been better and more transparent. For example, were people with aphasia not that involved in this type or in this part of the process? And what now? We are currently working with a publisher, an app developer, a video maker, and a marketing company, as well as developing the conversation partner training as a process. In a process with a group of 18 trainers, all healthcare professionals. So they form like a new stakeholder group. Before moving into the third phase of implementation, we and the co-designers will verify and test if the new solutions could work as intended. The project has, over the years, faced many challenges. For example, only some stakeholders, as I already said, were involved from the beginning. And furthermore, the researchers and stakeholder groups had no experience in PPI methods, whereas designers and health innovators had no experience in communicating with people with aphasia. However, I find it has been a very rewarding and enlightening process, not just for me as a researcher, but certainly for all stakeholder groups as well. As you can see, there's a bit from an email I received from a co-designer with aphasia after one of our workshops. We found out that despite having stakeholders included with severe communication difficulties, PPI was feasible with the right methods and support. Thank you.
Thank you, Jytte. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our panel. So thank you for sharing all of those really honest challenges and solutions, but also highlighting the rewarding aspects of it as well. So I'll go to our panel. Carolyn, Denis, great.
I don't really have a question, but I think there seems to be very good involvement with the patients and people involved with the illness and that. There seems to be very good involvement all the way through, and with the developing the concepts and bringing them through all the way. I think there's very good PPI involvement there, so well done. Thanks.
Thank you, even though I would have liked to involve people with aphasia much before than we actually did. Yeah.
But what I would say to you is, now can't make up my mind, it's whether or not because of your knowledge of working with people with aphasia, or you're in the hometown of the author Hans Christian Andersen, because the telling of what you're doing with pictures, with colour, with symbols, I think makes it understandable and accessible for everybody. And I think there's something for all researchers about just looking at how we make up slides and use them. So I just commend you for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And next up is Bridget from RCSI, who's going to talk about a collaborative PhD project in primary care.
Thanks, Nikita. Yes, so my name is Bridget Kielym, and I'm presenting on behalf of the Collaborative Doctoral Awards in Multimorbidity funded by the HRB. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today about developing a PPI panel to support 4 collaborative PhD projects in the area of multimorbidity. So context. So like I said, we're going to set up a PPI panel. This is going to be embedded within a structured PhD program in multimorbidity. There will be 4 PhD students. There's myself, I'm a GP, James in the audience, maths and psychology, Louise, who's a psychologist, and our colleague Aisling, who's a pharmacist, across 2 institutions, NUIG and RCSI. And the projects that we will work on will examine different aspects of multimorbidity. And multimorbidity is commonly defined as 2 or more chronic conditions, and we'll be looking at the more complex end of multimorbidity, so people who are on 10 or more medications. And people with multimorbidity face challenges because of polypharmacy, and particularly treatment adherence and medication safety. And the costs and challenges of adhering to guidelines that have a single disease focus rather than a patient focus, and the challenge of fragmented care and more mental health problems in people with multimorbidity, and we are aiming to address those through the 4 different projects. The PhD will be supported by a curriculum, and we have been attending modules in population and health services research through the SPHERE programme. And we've also been having seminars on multimorbidity from a range of experts, including colleagues here in NUIG. And of course, we've been getting a lot of support and training in PPI. Big thanks to Dr. Adele Murphy for that, but also to all our PPI Ignite colleagues who've been very helpful in responding to emails, phone calls, etc. The overall aim of the collaborative PhD programme is to produce primary care researchers skilled in mixed method, multidisciplinary research, including the practice of PPI. I feel that PPI is particularly relevant in multimorbidity, as it's very challenging to develop and evaluate complex interventions that are acceptable to patients and can be feasibly and meaningfully evaluated without placing additional burden on this group. So our methods for our public patient involvement is to develop a patient advisory group. And that will be composed of people with multimorbidity or carers of people with multimorbidity. And we aim to have the group as reflective as possible of the general demographic with regards to urban-rural divide, male-female, and the range of conditions that people have. We've been busy recruiting via GP practices, through personal contacts and by contacting charities. And we've really had a fantastic response over the last couple of months. And actually, I've written 10 people there, but newsflash, special update, we've actually got 12 people recruited so far at this stage. And our first meeting is scheduled for May the 30th, and our plan is to have that in a neutral venue outside the university to begin with. We're hoping that we will meet approximately 4 times per year over the next 3 years in the course of the PhD projects. And meetings will be facilitated by the PhD students. We're really learning by doing as we go. The panel will be asked to advise on all 4 projects at the relevant stages, and that sort of goes through the whole spectrum from study design right through to research dissemination. And while initially we're going to start off as working with a patient advisory group, we'll be more towards the consultation end of things. We really hope that as we build up relationships and build up capacity within the group, that we can move more towards collaboration, and hopefully particularly in the area of evaluating our work. So challenges, well, one that we're very cognizant of is the risk of overwhelming the PPI panel with 4 PhD projects. We're all slightly overwhelmed with the individual PhD projects, so we can imagine what it must be to present 4 different ones. And we are really cognizant of that and the importance of taking an iterative approach. And also that we make sure that we really put a lot of time and effort into planning when we're going to need PPI input, so that we're all not suddenly asking the panel to comment on 4 different patient information leaflets, consent forms, and help us with some analysis. We're also cognizant of the capacity of the panel potentially being limited by the burden of multimorbidity, as my colleague was considering earlier in terms of MS. And that's why we've tried to limit the meetings to 4 per year, and we have over-recruited. The positive being that hopefully we'll have a good representation at each meeting, the negative being that we may lose out on some continuity and potentially that might affect group dynamic as well. And then finally, the importance of evaluation of PPI. Some concerns about blurring the boundaries between involvement and research, and of course getting consent and ethical approval will be very important for the evaluation research part of it. And also, of course, there are the challenges of the evaluation, what to measure and how to measure it. And at the moment, we're considering a mixed methods approach with quantitatively looking at our materials and how they've changed over time due to PPI input, and qualitatively looking at changes to knowledge, attitudes and practice towards PPI, and barriers and facilitators to PPI through interviews with the PPI panel, ourselves as the PhD students and supervisors, and other people who've been involved in the process. And I'd be particularly interested in the panel's opinion about the evaluation process. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Couple of points. If you're evaluating like that, it's qualitative research. So you'll have to, that's going to be difficult because your PPI panel are bringing their personal experience to this, and then you're doing some research in it, right? So just make sure people know which hats they're wearing. And sometimes it's about being just extra explicit. I'm asking this because we're now going into this phase, so there's no doubt. And then the only other thing just to observe is, I would suggest you talk to Chiara and Cameron. Did I get that right? Cameron. Because I think what they were saying earlier about, it's not a support group. And I think if they were to come along and talk to your group, you don't have to, right? Suggesting, would be quite useful, because what it would be is their experience of being advisors. Because with multimorbidity, with cancer and other conditions, we think we're there because of our story. So we tell our story, and it's been clear that you're there to help research, and the story's in a box at the side which you can go into. So you need to give people time to tell the story so you can go on with the work. Just
Great. No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And I certainly agree with you on both of those points. In looking at evaluation, what do you hope to accomplish in the evaluation? And I think if you can identify what you hope to accomplish, it will be much easier then to decide on your evaluation methods. And I know both qualitative and quantitative evaluations are very valuable. And then the comment about that is, who would be doing those evaluations, because I think it's important to look at the system that's in place, as well as the PhD students who are going through this process and the PPI group.
Thank you very much. And so would you suggest an independent evaluation rather than the PhD students who are involved in it evaluating?
With new PhD graduates who are often looking for positions, etc., I certainly would suggest an independent evaluator who maintains confidentiality and de-identifies your data. De-identifying your data, particularly with your multimorbidity, that may be a difficult issue, but it's something to think about. How can you protect the identity of the PhD students as well as your patient panel?
Thank you.
Is why are you required to evaluate PPI in your projects? Have you given that much thought? I'm just wondering, and certainly I value the panel's opinions about should everybody who uses PPI have to evaluate it. Just wondered, do you have to do it?
I think that's a really valuable, and something I was thinking about on the train on the way up when I was thinking about this, because from one point you kind of think, well, we're going to do PPI anyway, it's the right thing to do. So we're not going to not do it because the PPI panel didn't make a major change to the patient information leaflet, for example. That's not actually going to change things. I suppose we're looking at that to maybe make the case for PPI, to show that how we can make things better, and that there's a change, but not that we're going to stop it. And
document it rather than evaluating it per se.
Probably, maybe. Yeah, and I think that's probably fair to say. And then I think there's a separate question about, well, what methods work, or what are the barriers and facilitators. And I think the question about our journey throughout the PhD is particularly interesting, although obviously a sample of 4 isn't a huge sample, but I think it is worth looking at in depth to show can we embed this into future researcher training going forward.
I think in that sense, because we do need some of what we do in this world to be evidence-based, right? We do need to increase the knowledge in that space. But I think your point's right, Molly, because we don't say, have we evaluated the statisticians we've talked to? It should just be the normal thing. But often when Christina Staley and others, the first thing we do is look at you do, is look at grey literature. And if it's not there, if it's not in the, not just in the grey, but in the journals that we've talked about PPI, then it's almost as if it doesn't exist. So I think there's a bit where it's useful to do some of that. I like the fact that it's an add-on or an extra, but integral to it. But the big question is, should we be? And sometimes we shouldn't.
And I think we have to convince funders that PPI is important, and funders look at the evidence.
Do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, from a PPI perspective, there's still a sense that we are still having to justify our existence and the work that we do. Whereas, as you quite rightly said, we're not evaluating the professional. So if you're not a professional, you sort of have to justify your identity and that journey, and that's that. Yeah, it's a game really. You have to play.
And I think we evaluate the professionals in research by funding. If your research is not quality research, then it's not funded, it's not published, you don't advance in your career. So I think that evaluation needs to transcend across all levels, not just PPI.
Yeah, so otherwise this PPI was a pinch of salt.
No, I would just agree entirely. I think we are still fighting for our presence. I do worry that certainly in Great Britain, after Brexit has hit, whichever view you take, I think it will be a rough time for the economy. I think that could be a cut for a lot of patient public involvement. So, but that's why I'm sort of keen for some of the evaluation. But what I would say is there are an awful lot of researchers, policymakers, politicians who really want this to happen. So there are more people for us than against us, but there's still a bit of a push required.
Talking about evaluating the method that I used to bridge that, to bring that evaluation together and to benefit the research. So it's, and I think if we don't evaluate that and see whether it's actually successful or not, then we won't advance those methods.
Yeah.
So I think it just, evaluation is a huge field, so we need to be very specific about what we're talking about when we talk about it.
Great. Thanks, Bridget, everyone. We have our last speakers, Virginia and Anne-Laure. Thank you very much for coming to speak, both of you. And thanks everybody for being on time. So we actually will have a few minutes at the end for a bit more audience interaction, which would be great.
We can take half an hour then, can we?
I should have said it afterwards, shouldn't I? Okay, thanks.
Right. Right, so thank you everybody and for having us. I'm Anne-Laure Donskoy. I am a patient. I'm a survivor in my own field, and I am a member of the Service User and Carer Working Group of the NHS R&D Forum.
Hi, I'm Virginia Minogue. I moved to Ireland probably about 16 months ago and have been working as an independent consultant since I came. Prior to that, I had a career in research management in the NHS, and I'm a senior leader in the NHS R&D Forum, which is a professional network for research managers.
Oh yes. Does anybody take? Yeah, right. Okay. Yes, it's worked. Sorry, I'm a bit of a technophobe sometimes. Right, so as service users and carers, we are increasingly involved in all aspects of healthcare research, from co-applicancy on funding applications to all aspects of the research process, so active engagement. But as co-production increases, we also take on more responsibilities to fulfill all these roles. And well, the fact is that we're not always aware that this involvement has legal, governance, and ethical implications. If I put my name at the bottom of a funding application, well, this means that I have the same responsibilities, the same level of responsibilities as any other co-applicant. And this means that systems should be put in place to ensure that service users and carers involved in research fully understand these specific aspects and their implications. This is an issue which has been discussed many times in our group in the last few years, and we felt that it's rarely addressed adequately through the usual channels, if at all. So we had to do something about it. Starting from our immediate experiences, we use an iterative user participation and co-creation review methodology to develop and test our thinking. This approach helped inform the data analysis and provide some insight into the findings. So what did we do? We did a literature review and a search which found no directly relevant data, which confirmed that this was an area which indeed had not been previously addressed. Most of the literature on PPI focuses on approaches to PPIE, how to do PPIE, its impact of PPIE, evaluation of PPIE, heaps of it. Based on members' own narratives and experiences of involvement, we produced definitions of key areas and roles, and we felt it was really important to reach a consensus on that. We collected further evidence from a range of stakeholders from across the R&D forums, own working groups, and the wider research management community. Finally, all throughout this process, evidence was systematically reported, reviewed during our quarterly meetings and via email communications. This was important to not only engage in sense checking, but also to keep the work grounded where it had started and to reach a consensus on the emerging themes. We have tested our findings at 2 different workshops, the NHS R&D Forum as well as the NIHR Involve conferences in 2017. So both involving a really wide range of participants with an interest in PPI from across the research community. So that's Research Design Services, the Involve Coordinating Centre and Advisory Service, the Health Research Authority, universities, charity, the forum itself. So a really good mix of regulatory, I could never pronounce that one.
Regulatory?
That's the one. You know, ask a bloody foreigner. And funding bodies. Participants acknowledged that our work was really important because it was addressing fundamental issues, governance issues that they had themselves encountered many times, but about which they had more questions really than answers. So I'll pass you on now to Virginia. We'll go into a bit more detail.
Okay, so what we did was collected a range of evidence, as Anne-Laure said, and that really confirmed the hypothesis that we'd started out with, that there was a lack of understanding on the part of research managers, sponsors particularly. Now we'll come back to the issue of sponsors of research project, funders, but also service users and carers and PPI representatives in terms of their understanding of roles and responsibilities as research team members or co-applicants. And co-applicancy was quite a new issue at this point. So what we did was we themed the different challenges that people had really identified. So that came under the headings, as you'll see from the diagram that we have, which hasn't appeared yet. There you go. Which was really around roles, responsibilities, contracts and written agreements, and that's still a real challenge for us, so we'll be grateful for any thoughts on that. Well-being of say, service users and carers throughout the duration of a project. Intellectual property and publication. Again, people are being involved in presenting, providing publications was quite a new area. Liability and also sponsors, which I've mentioned, it was a huge issue throughout. I'm not going to talk about all those because obviously we've got very limited time this afternoon to talk about them. So I'll just pick out a few key areas. Certainly in terms of roles and responsibilities, understanding the legal, ethical and governance implications for all those different stakeholders was quite an issue. That has a knock-on effect because if you don't understand your roles and responsibilities, then how can you fulfill them? What do you do if you find you can't fulfill those responsibilities? Who do you go to? And sponsors need to be very clear at the beginning of a project how they're delegating roles and responsibilities. If they're not making that clear to service users and carers and other members of a research team, then that causes complications from the outset. So that's still quite a large area for us and quite a large challenge. The other major challenge, particularly for the NHS is made up of about 450 different organisations. The majority of those are research active. Almost all of those involve patients and the public in different ways. They all run in very different ways as well. They can be managed, they're all independent organisations, can be managed in different ways. Service users and carers are involved in those organisations under very different arrangements as well. We found there were volunteers, there were independent consultants, there were people employed for the duration of projects, there were people who didn't have any sort of agreement at all. So some people had contracts, some were registered as volunteers, and some had written agreements or honorary passports. But it was different. Many, many different arrangements which conferred no employment support on them, no HR support, but some did because they were registered as employees. So within the same teams, research teams, you've got people with different arrangements and different agreements. How can that be right? a real concern for us. Of course, fundamentally, patients and public who are getting involved with us have the right to choose the way that they wish to engage, whether that's a volunteer. But ethically, we had, some huge issues coming to us. Not everybody has a good experience at PPI, and I guess that's a lot of the evidence we gathered. We did also collect examples of good practice, and that's helped us to develop a set of guidelines as well. Sponsors, it was very clear, didn't understand necessarily the responsibility they had for PPI and for engaging people within projects. So that was an area that, as a forum, with some of the other regulatory agencies, they're working with in terms of developing guidance for sponsors as well. I think from a very personal point of view, some of the people that fed back to us in confidence was that their well-being had not necessarily been protected throughout a project. We often forget that a number of the people who we're working with still have conditions, ongoing conditions, and it's really important, and people have spoken about it today, that they're supported throughout the project. They're allowed to take time out and come back in when they need to. So that was, quite a big issue, that people didn't feel that they were necessarily supported. So given time, I won't go into the other areas on the chart, but do talk to us and we'll point you towards the guidelines. What we've done in terms of solution, raising awareness, we've had a number of workshops. We're having a follow-up workshop in a couple of weeks' time because we see this as still a growing piece of work and an iterative. We need to talk to our research management community and develop it and evaluate the guidance as we're going along. So we published 2 papers for the community. We've got an academic article in press, should be out in the next month or so. But most importantly, we developed 2 versions of guidance. One is particularly aimed at our community, which is the R&D management community, and that takes the form of a decision support tool to help them to support others in understanding their responsibility. The other we developed in collaboration with Involve and the Health Research Authority, and that's for researchers and for service users and carers to guide them in terms of the issues that they might face, and hopefully to give them some confidence and to empower them to ask the right questions when they are getting involved and are feeling a little bit uncertain about what those responsibilities are and who they can talk to about those responsibilities. So I guess just finally, the areas that we've still got huge challenges with, I suppose, around the issues for sponsors and researchers understanding those roles, but also, more importantly for us, in terms of ensuring the consistency of those contracts and those written agreements so that we can be sure that people understand the terms of the agreements they have. So I guess those are the questions that we would pose to you as a panel, if you can advise us on those. So thank you very much. Anne-Laure, did you want to say anything?
Just one sentence really from me. It's, as a PPI member, somebody who's been involved in all of this for quite some time, it feels more like the current framework potentially fails us. But we feel that if all of those issues are addressed and if the proper systems are put in place, then what looks at the moment like barriers can be very easily turned into opportunities. So that's what I want to leave you, that particular positive thought in mind. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. First and foremost, it's good to know that you're doing this work, right? Because I think you're absolutely right that there's very little guidance. And if you don't do some of this, it's not problems from the beginning. It's when the problem kicks off. You really have got serious difficulties. Reassure people, but also challenge. When you're just going out and going into a support group to talk to them, to get their views, it's fine, right? For the most part, you don't need to. But you do need to think about safeguarding. Safeguarding for yourselves going out, but you also need to think about, what's the impact of what I'm about to tell these people in the research area, right? If people don't know that people die after 5 years and you're going in, right? So quite often, certainly in cancer, we would say to researchers, if you're going out, is there a local nurse that could come with you? Just to listen to the person, to make sure they're all right. So if something is said, but for the most part, this really comes in when you're saying, if you've gone out and talked to somebody, it's fine, right? For the most part. When you start to say, come and help me with something, start to get the rules right. If you say to them, take on a role as co-applicant, then you have to do this. And you almost have to go through HR, because it's the same rules. But what makes it still workplace, and when it works properly, is when you include Anne-Laure and others like you to help write that. Because if we just go as right in the darkened room, it fails. We have to work on this together. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I would, absolutely. And it's quite funny, inverted commas. I mean, I've been part of, sort of NHS type projects, and at one point in my life, I found myself, oops, this is dangerous. At one point in my life, I found myself leading a user-led project. And this is the first thing I did before I started the actual piece of work. I put in place rules of engagement. What people I was going to recruit on my team, so service users for the most part, and there were a couple of carers. What's going to happen, what you can expect from me, what you can expect from the project, and what I can expect from you. And put in heaps of flexibility, throw everything you can at it. So this was a mental health-based context. So I made sure that in my budget, and I argued the hell with the primary care trust to allow me to have a bit of money, so that if there was going to be any issue of either when people did interviews or whatever else was going on in the project, that I'm not a psychologist at all, I could signpost these people, say, don't worry, there is money, a bit of money in the project, and I can give you this address, and you can use it or not use it, do what you want. But rules of engagement, it sounds, it's actually quite sophisticated to do, but there's no reason why it couldn't be done. But the problem I find as a PPI member involved in research is that the systems in place from HR, all the rest of it, they're not really for us, patients. They're meant for more regular type employees, and they don't realize we do need a lot of flexibility. So contracts that are designed for us also have to have this kind of level of flexibility, because I might disappear for 3 months. What are you going to do? Because I might be on benefits, so paying me is it's nice when it happens, but how are you, the system and that contract, going to support me while I'm, battling with the benefits people and battling with that institution's HR on the other end? We need, flexibility has got to be the word, and that and rules of engagement from my perspective. Sorry.
And on the call, so what are your expectations of me? And that was the response I got, right? Nothing. So look at I'll send an email out afterwards. I still go very little. It was, we just want to know there's a patient in the room. And so I started to be just a bit more challenging and difficult, because they weren't addressing things.
I think through the course of this, we got some quite harrowing experiences of where PPI had not worked particularly well. But I think what was common to each of them was, if there'd been a proper agreement and support built in at the beginning, all of those situations almost could have been avoided. So I think communication, thinking about the needs of the person or the people you were involving, were absolutely fundamental to getting it right.
And I certainly agree with you. But I think it's a developmental process that we go through. I know at first in the U.S., we were in our university, we were developing memorandums of understandings, or MOUs. And the university set it up for, this is what the community or patient group will do. There was nothing about what the university would do. So now we've instituted a change mechanism that really defines what is it that the university will do for the patient or the community, and what are the expectations of what the patient group will do. So both of those are very important. It's not only one, because we must support our patient groups. We're coming to them for help.
Is something that PPI Ignite within NUI Galway could do a lot for within our university. So there's, I suppose, two issues there. There's kind of protocols that could be developed at a university level that research groups within the university in a number of different settings could use. And I think it, what you were saying in terms of that a lot of those difficulties could have been avoided had that been decided at the outset. And I don't think that's through malicious reasons.
No.
Actually, it's just research groups are kind of blundering into these things. Patients are signing up to things that they're not, and nobody's kind of taking the lead. So I think it is something certainly in our situation that a group like PPI Ignite could take a lead on. I think there's another really interesting thing that you've raised there around HR and around employment, ways to employ PPI members. And I think that this is really quite tricky, and I was very interested by the person who presented it, who had the 20% full-time equivalent person on the project. And they're employed as a researcher, so they're on a research contract.
Yeah, the title of the post is Multiple Sclerosis Patient Representative / Research Assistant, so it's on a research assistant scale.
Yeah. I think we need to do a lot to change things in that, because I know certainly with people who we've tried to engage with, just the reimbursement systems are so cumbersome and slow, and
they're a nightmare from our perspective.
I was just going to say that, because I think that's the one thing as a whole university, if that was clarified, so it didn't matter you're in this project and that project, there must be a computer system that later on sorts out where it goes. But ultimately the system of, I'm fine now, but for a time when I was doing this, I'd spent some of my pension money, and I could find myself out £1,000 in journeys to London, right, easily, over a month, and going, well, when's that going to come in, So speeding that up and having some unified system would be very helpful.
And I might just add, one of the things that I was able to change with a major grant that we had, not giving to individuals, but giving to organizations money up front. If they had a $10,000 contract, then the university would give them $3,000 to $5,000 up front. But they couldn't get the rest of the contract until they actually documented how the money that they were given was spent. And this took the liability away from having to spend their own money to do the work and then wait as long as 6 months to get the money back. So we were able to change the system.
But that's also provided that the organisation that gets the money also has proper systems in place. Not all have that. Not all have HR. Not all have accountants. Some of them are, a three-man job. So.
Just one comment at the back.
I just a thought. Perhaps under H2020 funding. Proposals and various things like that, you say that there's PPI gradually being embedded into those proposals, so would some budget allocation be possible through that stream? Perhaps?
I think that's the way we're aiming towards, is to actually have a budget line in at the start, and that's what we did in the primary care clinical trials network, and so we have a public and patient representation group that Denis is a part of that's embedded there since 2016, and it's a matter of thinking about this early on in the grant application.
Exactly, just early integration of that. And also I just wondered, would protocol and various aspects of that come under ethical clearance? Could that be inbuilt also from the beginning of the design for the trial?
Does anyone want to comment on the whether ethical approval is required for PPI, or whether
in the UK it's not, as long as you're not capturing the data and using it in a kind of sense of reporting it. And there's good guidance on that on the Health Research Authority and Involve websites, and it makes it clear. There's another workshop going on the difference between qualitative research and PPI, and I think it's that, for me it's research is inquiry and PPI is inquiry. It's about asking after people, not going, what did you do, how was that, what did it? That's a crude way.
And in the US, we actually require the community groups or the PPI group to take what's called city training, which is an ethical training in research ethics, so that they actually know the guidelines. And so research ethics apply equally to the researcher and to the community group. So if the community or PPI group violates research ethics and I'm the PI on that, then I am responsible for that. And it will affect my grant funding.
Yeah, excellent. Right.
They can actually close my grant down.
Oh, really? Okay, right. Good to know.
Jytte, could I make a comment on all the speakers?
Yeah.
Just to say thank you very much to all of you. This isn't a science. I think for you to be brave enough to come here and give these and present these and put it in front of a panel for others to learn from, to share it, and to get this discussion going. I think, in Galway should be praised for doing this, because I think this is just, because these are about ongoing conversations. There's no magical book somewhere. We're learning together on this. And I think to do it in this way, I've learned so much from what you're doing, and it's been a pleasure to hear these presentations.
Very well said, Derek, and thank you to our panel. Thank you all for being here as well and listening and participating.